with ADHD and other neurodivergent gifts. And I am your presenter, Sandy Bean. So what we're going to talk about today is I want you to understand neurodiversity just in general. You may have a general understanding of it, but I want to make sure we all have common vocabulary as we move through our content. And then we're going to talk about impacts on major areas of your life that you might notice. And then we are going to talk about some tips for success. And I'm going to give you some options to work together. And then if you have questions at the very end, we will have time for those questions. And if you would rather not ask a question in this context, you can always send me a DM or you can email me at hello@sandybean.com. So let's talk about me just briefly. I have 2 master's degrees in education, and I'm an educator, coach, and they call me the connection queen because I have a big network of all kinds of people that I'm blessed to work with. I have almost 20 years experience in the education field, and I've taught kids from 4th grade all the way up through graduate level students, and primarily about setting cultures, about gifted students, and about working with diverse groups of students with neurodivergence and how to create impact for those individuals. I've also been nominated and won 2nd place for Best Networker in my area. I've received numerous education awards, spoken nationally, and things of that nature. And then I have 4 kids, 2 are autistic, all of them are gifted. And I just really love learning about how all of this kind of fits together because I love the creative thinking possibilities that come with individuals that don't always fit the mold. I think that we are definitely the way that the world is going to change in a really positive fashion. So what does it mean to be neurodiverse? So anybody who, and a lot of times you'll see this abbreviated as ND, but individuals whose neurological development differs from what society would consider neurotypical, NT, or the norm, right? Obviously, we know that there's a spectrum of function, and we know that nobody is going to function exactly like anyone else, but there's sort of this range of what they would consider, they meaning society, typical. And anything that falls outside of that range, we would consider that neurodiverse if it falls under these neurocognitive functions. And we'll talk about those in a minute. So this term neurodiverse recognizes and celebrates the natural variations of how people's brains work. So it doesn't necessarily look at them for most purposes as an impairment so much as a difference. However, there are obviously impairments when society is structured for neurotypical people that make it difficult for those of us that have neurodiverse brains to be able to function. So neurodiverse individuals, when we talk about this, it could be autism, ADHD, which is where our focus is going to be today, dyslexia, and other types of conditions, which we'll go into in a little bit. Giftedness is also a form of neurodiversity. There are actual brain differences in people that have a high IQ. Trauma also has a significant impact on neurodiversity. So there is evidence that as a child, significant trauma can actually create conditions in the brain that can create symptoms that look like ADHD. And if you have a significantly traumatic event, that it can exacerbate anything that may exist for you in terms of neurodevelopmental or neurodivergent challenges. So trauma does influence neurodiversity to some degree. It is also, in the research, they think that it is possible that people who are neurodiverse are more likely to develop PTSD following a traumatic event versus someone who is neurotypical, right? So it's sort of a horse and cart scenario. Is trauma causing neurodiverse things, or is what's happening with neurodiverse individuals inherently traumatic and they're just more likely to develop symptoms? Because a lot of times they tell us we don't even know what people that are untraumatized in society that have autism or ADHD, what that even looks like, because the world is so not designed for their typical level of function, which I find super interesting. So and you can drop it in the chat if you like to, but if you consider yourself someone with ADHD and you'd like to drop a 1 in the chat, just so I kind of know who I'm looking at here, that would be great. If you don't want to share, that's okay. But I identify as having ADHD and I'm also have a gifted brain. So if you want to throw 1 into the chat and let me know, I would love to see this. So ADHD is a neurodevelopmental disorder that associates what we deal with it in terms of our attention, right? It's why they call it attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And they also consider it Now it's all ADHD. Anytime you're diagnosed, it's ADHD, and there's inattentive type, and there's the hyperactive type, and there's combined type, right? So anytime you're talking about it, it's no longer ADD or ADHD, it's all ADHD. So what they consider ADHD to be is we have almost an abundance of attention, and it's difficult for us to direct where that attention is going to go because of the way our brains work. It's an ongoing pattern of what they call inattention, which is really sort of focused attention in the wrong place, essentially, hyperactivity or impulsivity. And hyperactivity can look different in different people. For me, my hyperactivity shows more when I'm nervous or I'm excited about something because my mask kind of drops. And hyperactivity for me is talking very quickly and a lot. So I just sort of like verbally dump and fidgeting. I was actually very surprised when I got my diagnosis of ADHD that I was hyperactive, but now looking back on it, I just thought I was high energy, and I'm like, oh no, that's actually hyperactivity. So it's very interesting to note that those patterns can look different in different people. Hyperactivity, when I thought about it, I thought of like little boys in elementary school that are like on their desk and under their desk, because that's what I was used to, right? But that hyperactive component can look very different in different people. And I saw someone drop in the chat about dyslexia, and we're going to talk about that too, because dyslexia is considered neurodivergence because of the way information is processed in dyslexia and dyscalculia in those types of brains. And incidentally, dyslexic individuals have some really powerful abilities in creating meaning when there's gaps in information. So it's pretty amazing. So with ADHD, it's developmental disorder, ongoing patterns of inattention, hyperactivity, or impulsivity. That is what we're talking about most prevalent here today. So ADHD, the brain just simply isn't wired the same. And it's the same for any type of neurodiversity, right? Our brains fire and receive information in different ways than a neurotypical brain. In ADHD, that default mode network is more often activated. So we tend to get pulled into whatever's grabbing our attention at that moment. It's very much a disorder of I'm present doing this, and it's hard for me to think about the other things I should do or I'm supposed to be doing without support, right? There are also neural network imbalances in terms of our reward system. And the frontal lobe is also impacted by ADHD, meaning there's a level of impulsivity that happens when we're not practiced. That's why a lot of times you'll see ADHD behaviors are much more pronounced or a lot stronger in younger people. And the reason for that is because their frontal lobe development isn't complete yet. So in adults, we can mask a little bit better. We can repress some of these tendencies in it. And when you're a kid, you really can't, right? So I thought that was pretty interesting. 4 to 5% of adults have ADHD, but it's interesting. If you're an entrepreneur, up to 29% of entrepreneurs have ADHD, which I was like, oh, okay, well, that's not surprising. And it could be because the conditions of self-employment just work better for people that have ADHD, or it could be because ADHD brains tend to be very creative and innovative, and we prefer those kinds of settings. So as I mentioned, ADHD is more an impairment of directed attention. We can pay attention. It's just, do we care? Sometimes we don't. So we have to train ourselves to care about the things that we should in order to function, and find other ways to work within the confines of things that are more difficult for us to remember. It also is an impairment of our working memory. And so that's why if you have ADHD and you're like making, food in the kitchen, for example, all of the cabinets will be open. You like skip the last step because your brain's already moved to the one after that, the next thing you have to do, and you just leave the cabinets open. I've literally left the refrigerator open and gone into the garage to get something for, a different ingredient, and then did something in the garage and come back 10 minutes later and my fridge is open. Can you drop a 1 in the chat if that is something that you have done, that you've left cabinets open, that you've left drawers open, that, you walked away from something that you shouldn't have walked away from? If this resonates with you, can you drop a 1 for me? Yes, perfect. Okay, a little bit. All right. So yeah, and for me, actually, one of the reasons I ended up getting a diagnosis of ADHD, there's 2 reasons. Number one, my daughter was very depressed. She's autistic, and I couldn't figure out why it was so difficult for me to be able to follow through with some of her things she needed therapeutically. And it was just, I couldn't remember. And I don't know, I felt like I was falling apart. And secondly, I left the stove on more than once when I was distracted and things were going really poorly. And I was like, all right, I'm going to burn the house down. Like, I need to figure out what's going on. So That was very helpful for me. So in the ADHD brain, we have lower levels of norepinephrine, and there's also an indication that our brains don't process it and convert things to dopamine the way that we should. We don't have the dopamine receptors that firing quite properly. So that's why hits of dopamine are so important for us, because it helps us keep ourselves, interested, keeps our mood regulated, and we don't process it the way a normal or typical brain would, right? We also have a weaker prefrontal cortex and an underactive caudate, which is part of the basal ganglia. So again, the way that we're processing attention and reward is just different. So we have to create external systems to be able to do those things. There's an interesting similarity and overlap between giftedness, ADHD, dyslexia too, and autism. So all of these neurodiversities that occur along a spectrum, they interact and they overlap. Can you please drop an emoji in the chat for me of your choice if you were identified gifted or you consider yourself gifted in anything? I'm talking artistic stuff, leadership, verbally gifted, academically gifted. Just drop that in for me so I can see who identifies in that area. Yeah, look at that. It's so interesting. Yep, look at that. So interestingly enough, the neurodiverse brains and gifted brains have some similarities. So, okay, if you have severe ADHD, there is evidence that some regions of the brain are smaller. But if you are a gifted person, there is evidence that in the brain of when you're young, right, you grow these neural connections between the ages of say 0 and 7. And around the age of 8 or 9, your brain starts to prune back the things that it doesn't think you need in terms of neural connection. In a gifted brain, the pruning process starts later, ends earlier, and looks very different. That pruning process also looks different in people with ADHD and autism. There is something that happens in the gifted brain that results in what Kazimir Dabrowski, he's a researcher, calls overexcitabilities. And these are 5 areas that you may see enhanced behaviors, enhanced perceptions in gifted people that can look a lot like things like ADHD and sensory processing disorder that we typically associate with autism and ADHD. So again, we've got another horse and cart scenario. Is is the gifted brain creating conditions that lead to diagnoses, or do people have both developmental things going on? You need a pretty good neuropsychological evaluation to be able to tease them out. But luckily, the treatment would be the same, right? So there's a large percentage of gifted people that also have ADHD, up to 50%. And again, those overexcitabilities in that gifted brain may create the conditions that are similar to these ADHD or autistic tendencies. Now, there are lots of cases where they're actually diagnosed, but it's just interesting to me that many people who are gifted have these behaviors and no other diagnosis, and then go through life thinking, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. I should be a high achiever. I should be remembering all this stuff. I should be getting straight A's, when literally their gifted brain is neurodiverse and needs accommodation before they can function on the level that they believe they should in order to fit into the neurotypical society. So it's super interesting stuff. Again, with a gifted brain, neural network imbalances, and you're going to notice that impact to the frontal lobe with gifted brains. Our attention goes towards what we're interested in. So back to ADHD, up to 8 million people or more of adults have ADHD, and the 3 major areas of impact are attention, activity, and impulse control. So obviously you can see how attention, where you put it, the activity or overactivity in the brain, and whether or not you're able to control your impulses can create problems in different areas of your life. And when we're dealing with different types of neurodiversities, you see different, impacts in these 3 areas as well. So briefly, I want to chat about autism, because many people that have ADHD also see behaviors and impacts that are similar to things you see in autism. So it presents quite differently in women than it does in men. A lot of women are late diagnosed with autism. And with ADHD as well. I think the average age of diagnosis for ADHD in boys is 6 or 7. And in girls, the low end of the range is 12, with the majority of women being diagnosed in their 30s and 40s. And they have mistaken diagnoses prior to that. And in autism as well, it's similar. So the social impact is generally, I forgot a Y there, what they first notice. And what I mean by social impact for women especially is that they'll notice they have almost a script that happens when they go to places that they run through. They'll notice that they aren't quite getting the joke when everybody else is getting it. And for gentlemen, it's a lot of times what people notice are those areas of obsessive interest, and there's also that social impairment too. So autism impacts your sensory system. You can be hyper calibrated to noise, to things that touch your skin, to taste, to textures, environments. And that happens as well with ADHD. There's an easy sensory overwhelm that happens when it's very stimulating. Sleep is impacted by neurodiversities. Executive function is impacted by ADHD and autism, and giftedness as well. People with autism tend to have areas of obsessive interest, as do people with ADHD, where they'll really dive in and hyper focus. So if you're hiring for a position and you say it's coding, if you have an autistic person on your team that is obsessed with, whatever that code language is, they're going to solve any problem. It's kind of amazing. And then masking. Now, this is part of where we get very burnt out when we're neurodiverse, is we are taught that our experience is invalid and that we need to behave a certain way or do a certain thing or speak a certain way in order to be acceptable. And so a lot of times people with ADHD and autism later in life, they don't even know who they are because they've been told that everything that they want to do just doesn't, don't do that. So for example, with obsessive interests, let's say, a child with autism is really into girls, like, let's just say horses. And, they're told all the time, like, stop talking about that. Don't talk, they learn that, oh my gosh, well, I have to figure out what's going to be socially acceptable for me in this situation. And there's all kinds of other examples of that have to do with, social behaviors, looking people in the eye, starting and ending a conversation. There's all of these different things that neurotypical people or polite, quote unquote, society expects that don't come naturally to neurodiverse individuals. And so if you are teaching a child or yourself to be able to function in society, it's very important not to invalidate the experience, but simply it's like teaching. I read this great analogy. It said, if you're teaching a child to speak French, then teach them to speak French. You're not making them French. Same with neurodiverse individuals. We need to know what we need to know to be able to function in situations, but we're not trying to change ourselves. And that's when I talk about autism and ADHD being a quote unquote superpower. Does it suck sometimes to have these conditions? Absolutely. Does it suck to have dyslexia? I'm sure. But there are things that we do if we honor who we are and ourselves that we do better than others. Okay, so again, multiple areas of the brain, and the intellectual function in autism varies hugely. Some people have, a profound impairment versus, others are superior cognitive. So it's a huge variance. So if we're looking at people that are autistic as well, we've got 2.2 million people who may or may not have ADHD, but are autistic. So these are large numbers of people. Other neurodiversities include dyslexia, Tourette syndrome, Down syndrome, OCD, borderline personality disorder, anxiety, depression. So anything that differs from that constructed, consistent way that a neurotypical would function, and it's its own structure and its own consistency, is what we consider a neurodivergence. So how does this show up for you? Well, it impacts major areas of your life, right? If you have dyslexia, you're going to process things differently, instructions, things that are visual, things that are verbal. If you have ADHD, again, you're going to process things differently. So it's going to impact your body, your physical health, the way you understand yourself spiritually, your relationships, your home, and even your success. Looking at yourself and comparing yourself through a neurotypical lens, you're going to notice that you're going to see yourself as having deficits, right? And I'm here to kind of talk to you about, well, how can you change that kind of thinking? I'd love for you to drop me either body, home, relationship, or success when you think about the things that your neurodiversity presents to you in terms of challenges. Which one of these 4 things do you think it presents the most challenge for you? Is it in your body, in the way that you care for yourself? Is it in what's happening in your home and your space? Is it in your relationships with others? Or is it in your work and your success? Where do you think you see the most profound impact of what you believe is because of your disability or because of your neurodivergence? Yeah, work, home, yeah. Home and relationships, success, home, relationships, all of them. Yeah, it's crazy, right? It's very pervasive. And let me talk to you a little bit about why I think that begins. So first of all, the title of this presentation is Dancing with Your Neurodiversity. And the reason I like to say that is because we can't run from who we are. We are wired differently, and that is that. Right? But we can dance with it a little bit. We can say, okay, this is what I need at this moment. So I'm going to step back. I'm going to step forward. I'm going to hold on to this. And we can understand the music that's happening so we can move through our lives in a way that feels a lot less like climbing a mountain or running away, and a lot more like a dance where we understand how everything works. So how does that need to look and what does that mean? Well, you're going to need some support to educate yourself so you can anticipate what your brain may do and what your body may be feeling. A partner to do the dance always works well, having someone that's accountable. You have to understand then through that when you're supposed to push in and advocate, or when it's helpful for you to learn or listen to your body, or, and just be able to walk that line. And then forcing something, step on your own toes, stepping on other people's toes because you don't know any better. That's what I mean by dancing, right? Having a partner, anticipating the steps, understanding when to lean in and when to lean back. That's what's going to create success for you. So the first part is always to educate yourself. Learning about your neurodiversity is helpful. Now, for a lot of people, and I put a post in my Neurodivergent Nation group about this, getting a diagnosis is very personal. Self-diagnosis is completely valid. There are people that don't want paper trail of a diagnosis for whatever reason. It is okay to not want one. I personally wanted one because I use medication and I wanted to be able to learn about what was going on in my brain. I wanted to be able to access scholarships and healthcare for my kids, which is why they have their autism diagnoses. But for you, there are reasons why you maybe wouldn't want to have a diagnosis. It's very personal, right? So once you've educated yourself, then you understand your brain, you can use strategies to support yourself. It's helpful to understand what the neurotypical expectation is, but it's also helpful to understand if that doesn't work for you, how can you either make it work for you or educate them so that you can do it your way, because their way is not always the best way. So we're going to chat about some tips as they relate to each area. First of all, your body. Okay, so how might your neurodiversity impact your body? Well, first of all, you should know that if you are neurodiverse, you are very likely to have other co-occurring conditions. People that are autistic often have chronic pain. People that have ADHD often have migraine. There's a lot of different things that can happen that may occur in the same areas of the brain because of the way that your body is, or your brain is structured. Here are the impacts on the body, though, specifically. You may have, I forgot to delete some stuff. Chronic stress happens a ton. And the reason for that is you're functioning in a world that doesn't work for you. You may be chronically stressed. And we all know that chronic stress breaks the body down. Neurodiverse people often have trouble sleeping, which again contributes to chronic stress. And neurodiverse people often have poor eating habits. People with ADHD may forget to eat. ADHD is associated with binge eating disorders. Autism is heavily associated with anorexia and ARFID, a lot of times because of sensory issues relating to food. If you've had any of these impacts on your body, if you suffer from chronic stress, if you have trouble sleeping, or if you think your eating habits are poor, can you just drop a one in the chat for me so I can see? Do you suffer from poor eating habits? Do you have chronic stress? Do you have trouble sleeping? Those are all because of the way that your brain is wired. There are ways that you can support yourself, right? The poor eating habits, I think, is super interesting, especially when we look at disordered eating behaviors, because many times when we're dealing with disordered eating behaviors or sleep problems or stress, we don't tell our providers that we're neurodivergent. And so therefore, what works for a neurotypical brain doesn't always work for a neurodivergent brain. So you have to make sure the people that are helping you care for yourself understand neurodivergence. So what's the dance? What do you do here? Well, you need to know yourself well enough to rest, and you have to accommodate sensory needs. If you're already burnt out, you need a lot of rest to recover from that. Autistic burnout can be as painful and difficult as fibromyalgia. It's very difficult. ADHD burnout, it's very negative on your self-perception. Meditating and resourcing properly is important. You may have to set timers to remind yourself to eat. You may have to keep water around in a really loud colored cup so you remember to drink it. I have a water bottle that has an app that like dings so I drink it. And having an accountability partner through some of those things, like if you sit down to a meal with a partner so that you remember to eat, if you have somebody who checks in on you or takes your phone even as an adult to make sure you're going to sleep at a certain time. Melatonin can be really helpful, medication to help you sleep if you need it. All of those things are important. And sometimes our brain doesn't make the proper chemicals. I want you to know it's okay to buy them at the store. Right? We don't make them ourselves. We buy them at the store, just like we do if you don't have a chicken in your backyard laying eggs. Like, that's okay. So that's the dance here when we're dealing with your body. Your success. Okay, so what might impact your success? Well, you probably have a shitty time managing your deadlines, and that can be due to a lot of different things. It can be time blindness. exists very heavily in all types of neurodivergence, right? Especially my ADHD and my dyslexics, right? We just don't notice when time goes by. Financial impulsivity is real in all types of neurodiversity, heavily with ADHD, especially because of the dopamine hit that spending provides. So it's important that you're aware that that could be an impact your long-term success. And decreased employment. If you are not in a place that's friendly to neurodivergence in terms of your work, it has obviously a negative impact. Up to 50% of autistic adults are underemployed or unemployed. And there are many, many successful adults with ADHD, but we're really paddling under the surface so heavily, it goes back to negative body impacts as well. And when we get burnt out, guess what? We can't keep up at work and we have decreased employment. So there are lots of reasons why decreased employment may exist. And part of what I do is help out at companies and talk to people about neurodivergence as well and accommodating those things. But you have to be aware of your own limits, especially with people with ADHD. I posted a reel about this last night. It can be very difficult to ask for help because we don't want people to see that we're a mess, or, we just don't even know what we need help with, because breaking tasks down to small steps can be challenging. So it's very important that you are aware that if you don't, though, you can only take on so much before things may start to fall apart, right? So by dropping a 1 in the chat, has anyone had a negative impact on them at work or in their financial life because of their neurodiversity? Have you been fired from a job? Have you not been able to produce and gotten burnt out? Have you had trouble and missed deadlines? Have you had problems with your credit or your spending because of your neurodiversity? Can you drop some information for me? Thank you. Yeah, let me see. Andrew, me too. We could trade some battle stories. It's crazy, right? It's so interesting. But the reason that you're seeing this, guys, is because we are expected to manage the same working memory deadlines and the same systems for these things as were created for people that don't have the same challenges with the way their brain processes information, or the same speed. A gifted person processes information so quickly. A lot of times we miss these middle steps and we forget, and then we have to play catch up. So there are things that in some contexts are very, very strong for us, but in other contexts, they kick our butts. And unfortunately in business, it's not designed necessarily for the individual, but to be kind of a lockstep system. So it can be difficult. So what's the dance here? Well, using timers, visual timers can be very, very helpful, and using visual cues for yourself. So if you know that there's something you have to get on top of, buying really brightly colored folders, brightly colored Post-it notes, things that are going to get your attention. Jessica sent me this great chick on Instagram who colors stuff in. She's so cute, to give herself a little dopamine hit and a visual cue of where she is in her progress. Learning to break things into action steps is great. Having an accountability person, if you have a big project, that will sit down with you and be like, okay, what are the actual action steps you need to take here? Because if I say, well, you need to set up your welcome sequence for your business, right? For marketing, what the hell does that even mean? Okay, well, you need to get an email server and set up an account. That's number 1. Number 2, you need to familiarize yourself with what an automation workflow is in that system. That's number 2. So there's all these steps that are inherent to those. And it's very difficult for some of us with neurodivergence, especially people with dyslexia and people with ADHD, to break things down into manageable chunks. So having an accountability buddy or a system to do that will help you. And then from those places, you can then delegate. And again, having an accountability person to create routines with, so that you can rely on the routine and stop relying on your shitty working memory to be able to get things done. I know how hard it is to establish routines, but I know that you have had some incident in your life where you've been able to establish a routine that you could just fall back on, and that's what keeps you from forgetting things, right? If you have the everything bag I talked about in my reels and you leave it by the door, it feels weird after a while when you don't grab your everything bag, and it helps you remember. The power of habits, if you're neurodiverse, cannot be overstated, right? You have to make sure that you really are doing what you need to do. Your relationships. Okay, impact on relationships. People with neurodiversities can often have a really poor self-concept. And when you have a poor self-concept, you're going to accept less than appropriate or less than the best behaviors and less than the best relationships from the people around you. You also may have communication challenges, right? You may not understand necessarily the nuances of conversation. If it's a text message, you may have trouble communicating how you feel because you may have trouble verbalizing your feelings if you don't have practice. And just your symptoms in general can make it difficult to maintain a relationship. If you burn out all week because of your, autism, ADHD, and on the weekends you don't have mental space to be able to connect to people, they may take it personally and not want to be in a relationship with you. So you may also have rejection sensitive dysphoria. If somebody doesn't call you when they say that they will, it may create deep, incredible anxiety in you, and you freak out. And then you realize later when you calm down that that was pretty unbecoming for an adult. So there's all these different things that can happen and impact your relationship with yourself and other people. Can you please, for me, drop a 1 in the chat if you have noticed any of these things in terms of your own personal relationships? Poor self-concept, communication challenges, any of your symptoms coming up that impact the others around you. You can even tell me like what specific symptom is bothering others. Like for me, it's really hard for me to remember to eat on time, right? So my kids want to eat dinner at 6:30 and I'm like, oh, it's 8 o'clock. I haven't even started something. So like, that's a problem. So having support to do that is important, right? How do we dance in this context? Well, communicate. So if you're finding that you're misunderstanding, it's really important that you talk to the person that you need to communicate with and just be very honest about your perceptions and the way that you feel. If you need them to be more black and white with the way they communicate with you, it's really important to get those skills built and in place. Really working on your self-concept, and that a diagnosis can actually very much help. For some people, they're like, oh, okay, well, I'm not just like this lazy piece of crap. Like I have a disability and the world's not designed for me. Let me learn about that. And it allows you to have incredible self-compassion once you begin to learn about that. So become aware of your patterns and the impact of your brain on the way that you do things, and learn to say no. Stop burning yourself out. Stop putting yourself in situations that aren't uncomfortable. If you don't like IKEA on a Saturday and your partner wants to go to IKEA on a Saturday and you'd rather claw your eyes out with a hot fork, tell them, maybe not that, but tell them you don't want to go. It's okay. Just be, can we go at a different time of day that makes me feel less overwhelmed? Things like that. If you need to go into situations where you are going to be uncomfortable, having tools like loop headphones, things like that can be very helpful to minimize whatever might be uncomfortable for you. It really comes down to communication and having some accountability structures. And then lastly, your time and spaces. So this one's where we see a lot of things. Organization can be a problem. Doom piles are huge. Do you have trouble being on time? Do you have a need for controlled spaces? Like I have to have things a certain way, temperatures a certain way, I have to have a blanket on my lap. Like, so you just don't like to go anywhere because you have to control what's around you. Do you see any of these impacts on yourself because of your neurodivergence? Yeah, wanting to do lots of stuff. I can see that happening. So wanting to do a lot of different things is amazing, but you have to be mindful of like, how much can you fit in your cup right now, right? It's important. Yeah, disorganization, totally. Controlled spaces, yep. And you might find this interesting, Carrie, for people that have these tendencies, a lot of times in an effort to stop themselves from creating chaos because it bothers them, they become minimalists. Right? They just don't even have things around to almost an extreme degree because they have to be organized, because they know that they can't give themselves any wiggle room because it will all go to shit and then they'll feel terrible. So yes, taking on too much all the time. Yeah, Kelly, part of that brain is your brain being able to prioritize, right? Part of your executive function is being able to prioritize the tasks that you need to prioritize. And yes, if there's clutter around, you can't make art. Go to organization, underestimate. Yes, all the time. How many of you are like, I'll be there, I can get ready. And then you look up and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to leave 5 minutes ago and I haven't even gotten dressed yet. So like, yeah, it happens. Yep, being on time, underestimate time. Even how long it takes me to drive places, I apparently can time travel. So, I went out to dinner with a friend last week and I was 15 minutes late. I've had this date on my calendar for 2 weeks. He was already sitting there. He already had his drink. And I sat down and apologized. And he was like, I knew you were going to be 15 minutes late. I just knew it was going to be my breathing room. I was like, I'm so sorry. And he was like, it's okay. Like, it's endearing. So he's already aware and accepts that. So I felt grace, but at the same time, I felt embarrassed. Like, I'm 45. I shouldn't be like doing this, but I literally cannot help it. And so giving yourself that grace is so important. If there's something that you have to leave for early, please leave early. People joke, yeah, it's horrible. My relationship ended. Yes. And it's not, we laugh about it, right? But it's not funny. It's horrible. Something that might help you when you do the dance. Make space and simplify. So Carrie, we just talked about this. Making space and simplifying means leaving some room in your calendar too, so that you have some wiggle time. It can be very helpful to put the driving time in your calendar, like with a little extra time, so that you know that that's going to happen. So my kids have set the clocks, at different times. So I'm on time sometimes. Creating routines, creating routines and having an accountability partner is super essential. Using timers, you can put a Post-it note on the bathroom door of the time you need to be out of there and make sure it's a very bright color. Having an accountability partner, again, very important stuff. If you have someone who's willing to call you and be like, no, we're on the phone, you need to go get ready. If it's something very important, that can be very helpful too. So the vulnerability it takes to have an accountability partner, it's not easy, but it's definitely worthwhile. Yes, I'm only on time for clients, court, and hot yoga. Put 15 minutes late. Katie, that's funny. Kathleen, no time for relationships. I sometimes feel that way because I pack my calendar because prioritization can be so challenging for me. So I've had to take steps back with the guidance of people that love me because I'll get people that don't understand me give me a very, very hard time for not creating a priority in my life for them. And it's not that. It's just that everything feels like a priority sometimes, So I want you to know that scattered is going to happen, right? It's going to happen because there are the constraints that we normally have in this world. And there are the constraints that come with dealing with other people. And when you're neurodivergent, it takes us a little bit more work and a little bit more time to create systems that are going to work for us. So help is key to that. You need compassion for yourself. You need to have education about what you're dealing with in your mind. You need all of those things. It's important that you really take the time to grant yourself that compassion and that you take one area of your life at a time, and that you spend some time kind of figuring out, okay, what is it that I need to do to create space and success in this area and move forward? If I were going to suggest where I'd begin, it would probably be with the relationship piece, because self-compassion and getting rid of your self-hatred is probably the most important part. So if you are feeling very overwhelmed, it's okay. I want you to understand that that's something that happens, especially when you begin to dig into, oh my gosh, what is my neurodivergence? Like my neurodivergent brain, like what is happening? Why am I falling apart? But, there's always support and there's always assistance. So before we get to the questions, I want to talk to you about ways to work with me. I do one-on-one coaching, so that's personalized targeted intervention. I do have coaching cohorts that open up every couple of months. They are small group. They're 8 weeks. We do a call a week, and it's an accountability group with other people who are also neurodivergent. And if something comes up, I do small coaching bits like, oh, hey, we're all struggling here with time management. Here's a strategy you can use. The Radiant Reset is my highest level offering right now. That is weekly coaching call and a daily routine with me 5 days a week, where we get up, we put our routine together, and you get my highest yield tools and education to really learn how to work within these confines. So if you're just beginning this journey, the reset is a great place to start, or the one-on-one, because you may want something more intensive. And if you have some understanding, but you just want an accountability partner or people that you can talk to that really get it, the cohort coaching is available. The cohort coaching is small. Like I only have 10 seats usually. So if that's something you're interested in, you'll want to pop in that right away. And the reset begins here in a couple of weeks. Let's see. Yep. Your brain sends you to sleep. I just shut down. I'm like, okay, we're done. So if you have questions about any of these, you can go to hello@sandybean.com. I do want to talk with you quickly about the Radiant Reset before we go to questions. And the Radiant Reset I'm most excited about because it is the solution to everything we talked about. This is the ultimate dance lesson, right? And the reason that this works is because at the end of these 6 weeks with me, I give you a routine. you feel a lot calmer, and you've got fuel for actual success. We take you through 6 weeks where you develop some self-compassion. We talk about some routines that are going to really work for you. I get to be with you in a Facebook group that's dedicated just to the Radiant Reset. And you get coaching calls with me and with Jessica and with experts and people who have been there, who are like, yeah, I accept you. I love you for where you are. Let's put a routine into place for whatever area of your life seems like it's falling apart. And we actually go through all of those 4 areas that we talked about and really focus in on what's going to work best for you. And of course, since it's written for neurodivergent people, it's written specifically, so it's broken down and accessible to you. So it's an accountability practice to help bring your baseline up so you can align yourself with success. So if you feel like you're a mess right now, you are not alone. Even if you feel like you're doing okay on the surface, but underneath, there's just so much that you need to do to feel calmer and feel more aligned, because frantic energy it doesn't help you. And so these are the things that I did when I was like, well, let's see, my adolescent daughter's going to kill herself. I can't seem to be on time to my job that I have to be on time. I taught public school. Everything was falling apart. And so these are the practices and the education that I brought in. So it's 4 key aspects, right? So it's 1 per week plus a prior and an ending week where we wrap everything up. So we study your body and what the impacts are and talk about what you need to do and create a routine surrounding support for your body. Then we spend a little time on work and service. And then we build in your relationships and your home and environment, just like we talked about the impacts that you're going to see throughout your through this slideshow we just talked about. We go in a little bit deeper and actually give you the tools and strategies and walk you through those and have those coaching calls. If waking up that early doesn't work for you because of your time zone or because that you're having trouble with that, I will give you a different accountability strategy to make sure that you're listening to the recordings and doing the activities in a way that works for you, that is regimented. And these are our ingredients. We bring in all these different things that are helpful. I talked about accountability. I talked about routines, and I talked about, meditation and play. And all of these things are things that neurodivergent people, we struggle with integrating into our lives. And these are very high impact strategies that we need. We are so much playing like right behind the 8 ball. It's just difficult for us to take a breath, right? And create something that makes sense for us in terms of a routine. So you get accountability with your goals. So you're going to set goals and I'm going to chase you down and make sure that you're making progress. You get tools and gifts. So you'll get support and feel supported. You will be held in this coaching and these conversations, and you will finally feel connected, like people get you. So if you've been going through this whole call being like, oh my God, she gets me. Oh my goodness. Believe me, that's the best part is getting in there and being like, well, this is what I did today. And other people being like, yeah, you know what? I get it. I got you. Right. It's super important that you have that community. Somebody asked woo woo. Okay, cool. We will get into that. So woo woo, what I mean by that is spirituality. Like there might be card pulls, there's crystals, meditation, just tools that you can pick and choose what's going to be effective for you. And it's all brain based, right? All brain based, because we understand how this neurocognitive process works. If you know anything about neuroplasticity, you know that it's possible to create new neural pathways. And that's what we want to do, because what we've done as neurodivergent individuals is we've created maladaptive coping strategies to survive that aren't serving us anymore. So the Radiant Reset is like a boot camp to rewire some of that so you can start to see success, and then you'll get to move forward in ways that feel better to you, right? So you get all of that. And the program, the morning power hour is 6 a.m. here, Eastern Standard Time in the US. And that's because I want to get you before decision fatigue kicks in and you aren't going to do this. Right? Again, if that doesn't work for you, the replays are always available. But if you can make a commitment to be in the same place at the same time, it's going to help that neural pathway get built a lot faster. There's small group coaching calls. You get a workbook. If you are stateside, you get a gift box. There's a celebration at the end if you're local. If not, we'll do a virtual celebration. It's a lot of accountability, but it's broken down into small pieces. So it's very digestible and it's handed to you in little pieces, right? So you do not get overwhelmed. Yeah, so that's our weekly flow. On Mondays, you get your overview. Tuesdays through Thursdays, there'll be some teaching, and then there's an interview you can listen to on Fridays with an expert. And then we have our live coaching call every Friday. You are going to be assigned things that you have to do for yourself that are fun, and then you have to play and you have to rest. But that's because we care about you and we know where you are, and we know that it can be difficult. Even if you've managed everything in the past, this is a reset, right? So you're like, wow, I'm trying to up level and all the shit show is happening again. What do I do? Come in for a reset with your people. So if you have any questions, you're not sure if it's a great fit, you can email me at hello@sandybean.com. The doors are only open to the reset for a limited time for, I think, another week. And the coaching cohort doors are only open until Thursday because I want to start the cohort Monday. So if you just need a little support, the cohort's great. Otherwise, if this sounds great to you and you really want to dig in and understand everything, the reset, I cannot recommend it enough. I'm super excited about it. It's my newest offering, and Jessica and I have really put a lot of love and work into